you find the will to fight back against a world that wants to keep you sedated, average, and stuck in place? Join us for the tools and strategies you need to create a life of abundance, discipline, and high achievement. This is the Tactical Empire with Jeff Smith.
Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Tactical Empire. I'm here today with Daniel Templin, who is a real estate investor, real estate coach, and entrepreneur. And he's got some really interesting concepts that he coaches on, and I am excited to dig in with him and teach you guys some of his tricks. Dan, thanks for your time today, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Hey, tell us a little bit about, we were talking offline a little bit about your coaching services and things like that, but tell me where you started in real estate, because
Sure.
you do a variety of things. And so I'm always interested in who hopped into what asset class and how they got there, because I'm a BRRRR guy. That's how I kind of broke in and then did multi-units and things like that. But I'm always fascinated by what people took on initially as they broke into the kind of real estate investing space.
Absolutely. So I love talking about how I got into real estate. Um, my wife and I met in college, and she was still in college when we bought our first house, and we bought a foreclosure house for it was $10,000 or $15,000. I don't remember the exact price. And we gutted it, completely flipped it, and we sold that house for $75,000, $80,000. And the day that after she graduated from college, I was a couple of years ahead of her. We used that seed money to buy our first business, which was a dive bar in my hometown. And after we ran that for a couple of years and really built it up, then we started investing in real estate again. But the way that we got into business in the first place was through a fix and flip. And we knew we wanted to get back in real estate. There wasn't a ton of creative ways to do it at that point. So at least that I knew about. And so I thought I had to have a bunch of capital. So we worked hard to save up capital to start investing in real estate. And we bought a multifamily with a business partner of mine, a small fiveplex. And we also started rental arbitrage for Airbnbs at that point, which we don't really do arbitrage anymore. We did so well with them that we were actually able to buy the buildings. So I really like capture and appreciation. So we got into real estate through our business, but we got into our business through real estate. So it's kind of a cycle.
Sure. So tell me about, what's the timeline? How long ago was this? From flip to arbitrage to everything else?
The flip was about 11 years ago. We've had the bar for almost a little over 10 years. And about almost 6 years ago, we started buying real estate. So
Okay. Do you still own the bar?
We do. We still own it. We have a general manager in place who does a great job. I have a weekly meeting with him that's anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, depending what's going on. And he pretty much runs the show. He actually started as a dishwasher, and as an extra part-time gig, he had another full-time job, and he liked working there, and he worked his way up. And I mean, he knows everything in and out. So
awesome. Do you invest in the same town? Are you buying your properties in the same town you live in?
We're about a 60-mile radius.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and our bar and restaurant is almost all the way down in Indiana, which is about 45 minutes from here. And we go a little bit north of Kalamazoo too.
Gotcha. So you had a fiveplex and then you started arbitraging. Tell me about what attracted. First of all, explain what arbitraging is for the audience.
Sure. So
layman's terms.
So arbitrage, if you do it ethically, there's a lot of people out there that sell fly-by-the-night courses on how to not do it ethically, but it's basically taking one asset and turning it into something else, and then you're leveraging the difference in what it's worth. And in real estate, when you're talking about Airbnbs, it specifically means find a landlord that is willing to rent out an apartment to you, and you tell that landlord that you're going to put it on Airbnb. And so you pay them rent, but then you keep the difference from the nightly stays. And that can be a really great way to get started. The thing that I always make sure to tell my students is that you have to do it ethically, and you have to make sure that your landlord knows that you're, wanting to do this, because in Michigan specifically, but in most states, standard leases will have in there that you can't sublet it out, that you can't perform any type of commercial activity. And so you want to make sure that you're covered, because you don't only want to make sure you have a good relationship in the business world locally, but you also want to make sure you're giving your guests a great experience. And if you have a guest that has to sneak around, or that is getting in trouble for being, a place they're not supposed to be, that it's just not a good situation the whole way around.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Transparency is the key in that space. You want everybody to be on the up and up, but it can be a win-win for everybody. Like I'm a buy and hold a bunch of properties, and I've been approached by arbitrage guys who want to come in and pay me over market rents
Yeah.
to lock up a lease. So in that case, it would be mutually beneficial, because a lot of people come to me and they're like, why would I ever do this? And for me, like, if I'm renting something for $2,000 and you came to me and you're like, Jeff, $2,300 a month and I'll lock in a 2-year lease. If you don't mind if I Airbnb it or short-term lease it. And like, from that standpoint, it increases my cash flow, let's say from $500 to $850 a month. And I've got a steady tenant in there, and you're running a business. So I mean, the relationships and the conversations I've had with people about it, if they run a solid business, it's actually a better situation for the landlord in my
100%.
experience,
Yep.
because you're going to fix what you mess up. Whereas my long-term clients don't necessarily do that. I'm lucky to
Right.
get them to clean the place, let alone fix damage and things like that.
Right. And that it really rings true, because that's some of the things that we teach is, you can there's a lot of things that bring value to a landlord, because I'm a traditional landlord as well. So I know
Mhm.
what is valuable to, a landlord that has a long-term tenant. And we set up direct deposit to their account. So you're never out there as a landlord chasing rent, and it always comes in a couple days early. We fix anything below $350 or whatever's negotiated. That's a huge deal, because you're not going to call over clogged toilets or a leaky sink, or,
Yeah.
an HVAC unit that we have the first call. So if it goes out and it's something that's small, we just take care of it. And that takes a huge load off of a landlord, and they really appreciate that. You have it professionally cleaned multiple times a week sometimes. It There's a lot of great benefits to traditional landlords in doing that. But there are a lot of downfalls too if you get into a situation where someone's not running a good business. And so,
Sure.
yeah, you want to make sure that they have either some type of track record, or they're using someone that has a track record to guide them. But it can really, like you said, be mutually beneficial for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's what really matters, is like who you're dealing with and who effectively you go into the lease with. Because I mean, honestly, if you're in there doing that stuff all the time, you're sending handymen over there, you're doing things like that, it actually maintains the asset at a higher level than I do if I let a long-term tenant come in there and live there for 7 years. Like,
Absolutely.
because you get in those long, I mean, you and I know that you get in those relationships where sometimes you don't hear from a tenant for 6 8 months, a year, and like you're like doing drive-bys. Is everything fine? The exterior looks fine. Who knows what they're doing in there?
Right.
I mean, you can schedule those walkthroughs and things like that, but like a lot of people don't necessarily do that. And so for you to be in there, touching it, cleaning it, working on it, sending your service guys over there. I mean, it really does keep the asset at kind of at a top-notch state, because you're in the hospitality business, and that, like, you're putting on a different hat in that space. And so it's I like it personally, but the relationship with the whoever's on the lease is the most important part of it, for sure.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so you definitely want a credible person that runs a legit business, and otherwise it could be bad or even worse than a long-term tenant potentially. So
Absolutely. Yep. So did you take some people up on that? And do you have some people that are subletting out your
we have not. I've just sat down with two guys do it on a pretty high level. And they've tried to take over, like they've floated the idea of taking over like my whole portfolio, like 50
Oh,
plus
wow.
homes to do it. And I'm just like, I don't feel comfortable with that. But the I could see the benefits for it. Like
Mhm.
having these meetings led me to like the financials of it all and like how it would be beneficial, obviously. And then not the deferred maintenance, that's the wrong term, but like the ability for me to not have to manage the property as stringently as we do, because you're essentially bringing in middle management,
Right,
if you will.
absolutely. It's a whole layer, you don't have loose handles on cabinets, you don't have, um, tiles that are broken, you don't have linoleum that's ripped up. Yeah.
Right, right. And you guys are in there fixing it immediately. Like I'm talking about deferred maintenance. For instance, I've got a house right now that I had a mom raccoon eat the roof off, uh, like a flashing for the roof, and bit a hole in there, got in there and had her babies in the attic.
Oh, man.
And so like you guys would catch something like that very quickly because you're there every 3 to 5 days, if you
Right.
will,
Yep.
looking for stuff like that. And so for us, we didn't find it until the tenant actually heard the raccoon up there. Then we had to get pest control. Now we've got to redeck the roof. Now we've got to get new shingles and all that stuff. But it probably wouldn't have been nearly as expensive had I mitigated it immediately.
Right, yeah. And
And so
you obviously can't be at your properties every day that have
sure.
long-term tenants in them. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So tell me about arbitrage fascinates me, right? Like I
Mhm.
spoke at a real estate event last week in North Carolina, and there was a 22-year-old kid in there who had just he lived in New Hampshire, and he had just got 4 units under arbitrage in the last 4 months and quit his day job doing that. And he was doing full-time everything. So he was like soup to nuts, the hospitality host and the cleaner and the trash out guy and the handyman and everything, which is cool when you're 22 and you
Right,
can
yeah.
justify it. And but it's an interesting way to break into the space. I was just having a conversation yesterday with my sister about it. Um, I just kind of liken it to flippers because you get addicted to that cash flow. Because if you're good at it, you can
Oh,
really
yeah.
generate some cash flow. And and you have to watch that addiction to being cash heavy, asset poor, because like that's how flippers get in the cycle, right? They get used to making a couple $1 million a year, and then their lifestyle grows to that multi-millions of dollars a year. So when you talk to them about holding on to properties, they're like, fuck no, I can't do that.
Right, absolutely.
What am I going to do with $600 a month?
Yep.
And
But
so
there's
go ahead.
definitely a time because like I said, we were like, well, we're not gaining appreciation here. So we
Mm,
really wanted to buy our properties because it, the cash flow is better, um, a little bit because obviously the mortgage is less than what rent would have been because the landlord had to make money before. But the the long-term picture is really what I'm concerned with. I'm trying to look 10, 15 years down the road, and it is great to stack that cash flow, and it is a great way for people like you said. If you literally start a couple of arbitrages and you are doing everything, you're doing the cleaning, you're doing the host communications, all of that, you can make more than a W-2 very easily, but you're going to
yeah.
be busy and you're going to be working your butt off. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what it takes at some point.
Oh
Like
yeah.
you
Yep.
have to work at some point. Like
Right.
that is part of the equation.
Yep.
You cannot avoid the inevitable work that is necessary to get to where you want to go for most
Yep.
people.
And
Um,
what I think
Go
is
ahead.
really important about that, that I always preach to people is that even if you are taking that route, which is great, if you don't have a lot of options and you're using, say you're using like 0% credit cards to buy the furniture. And so you
Mhm.
really need to get cash flowing quick. You want to set them up in a way that you can scale eventually. Once you have enough cash flow, once you are established, um, you're not going to be able to do much more. I think you said that one guy had 4 units that he was running all by himself. You can't flip 10 houses in one day by yourself doing all
Right.
the cleanings, right? So you want to set everything up in a way to where if you do want to do everything yourself in the beginning, that you can still grow because you already have it set up that you can, start to scale.
Yeah, he's probably tapped out because I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
like
that's a lot.
you probably have 3 or 4 hours to turn the units in some cases, and if
Hmm.
he has 4 bookings in one single day,
Yep.
like if yeah, for
You can't
sure.
do it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah,
And then you
exactly.
and then you have somebody that breaks something and it's a 4-hour repair and you've got 12 hours of cleaning and 4 hours to do it. It's not gonna
Yeah.
happen. And there's
So
ways to get creative about it. You can stagger your checkout dates. You can make sure that people can only check out of one property on certain days and other properties on certain days.
mhm.
You can kind of stretch your check-in and checkouts. Instead of doing 11 a.m. checkout, you could do a 10 a.m. checkout and a 5 o'clock check-in. So there's ways to get creative, but it
I've got buddies that send the people that are currently in the unit a discounted rate to stay multiple more days, like
mhm.
extend your trip type thing for
Yep.
$99 or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, I could see that being helpful as well. Like, please take me up on this.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
So you guys were very smart, it sounds like, and you parlayed your cash flow into actually acquiring the assets. But it
Mhm.
sounds to me like, and correct me if I'm wrong, are you still Airbnb the assets that you bought?
Yes, we have 7 active Airbnbs right now,
Okay.
and not all of our assets that we have as far as real estate are short-term rentals. We do have single-family homes. We have some apartment complexes that are small units that we have traditional. We actually have some mix too. So like the original fiveplex that we bought, we still have. We bird it, and we used the cash out to totally update 2 of the studios in that fiveplex, and so those are on Airbnb, and then we have 3 long-term rentals in there. We have a little bit of commercial office space, and we obviously own the restaurant too, so there's some commercial there.
Tell me about that. Let's talk the fiveplex because that fascinates me because I talk to people all the time that are like, well, we're going to throw some Airbnb units in there. So you've got a mix of long-term tenants with short-term tenants. What
Right.
problems has that ever caused you?
Uh, so the way that this building is set up, the studios were built off to the side as an addition, and they're on top of each other, and so the entrances are pretty separate. Uh,
Okay.
so we haven't really had a ton of issues. We One time I think that we had an issue with a long-term tenant's dog going to the bathroom near the entrance to a couple years ago, and there was a text message like, "Hey, you got to clean up after your pet. Also,
Yeah.
do it in your yard area instead of around the house." But you could definitely run into situations, and I have. So when I was arbitraging, the reverse, I wasn't the landlord; I was the arbitrager. We had guests that kept complaining. A new neighbor moved in, and their bedroom wall shared the bedroom wall with our unit, and they like to argue, and after they argued, they like to make up very loudly. So, there's nothing that I can do about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can complain to the landlord, they're not gonna do anything, they can't do anything, and so that is one issue that you can run into when you're doing arbitrage, is that you're kind of at the mercy of the quality of other tenants in a building if you choose to go into an apartment.
Yeah, and your hands are tied. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Spray in insulation? Like
Right,
that
yeah.
I mean, that's really your only option, and
Yep.
I don't even know that that's legal. You'd have to clear that with the landlord, I'm
Yeah,
sure,
yep.
and then just we've got this soundproof wall now.
Yeah, and other I mean, tenants in that building too, where in Michigan, weed is legal, so,
Yeah,
uh, they're smoking in their apartment. Well, that makes the entire, apartment smell, even though they're not doing it in our apartment,
sure.
and we would get complaints about that, and there's nothing you can do about that either, so.
I like hearing the flip side of it. Yeah,
Right.
that is interesting. I didn't
I've
even
been
think
on
about
both
that.
sides of it, so I know,
Sure.
the challenges that come with it.
Sure, sure. So tell me, if you don't mind, if like give me an example of like the financial differences now that you've got 3 units long term and 2 units short term. What does that look like financially if you can do that? Because this is a hot topic. People are buying
Sure.
boutique hotels and they're renovating those like with 8, 10 units, and they're
Yep.
making them Airbnbs. I want to know what the financial upside is um, to creating something like this. Obviously, it depends on how much money you spend in the renovations and how experiential it is and how close to things it is. I get
Right.
all that. But like, tell me like nuts and bolts. We make $800 a month on the long-term tenants. We make $1,800 a month on the short-term tenants. Just ballpark. I don't need like
I
your financials, obviously.
I know you prefaced it with, it's different with where you're at, and markets are different, location even in the markets are different. So what we teach people to do when they're looking to arbitrage is find the largest delta that you can. So you want low rent and you want a very high potential for high income on Airbnb. And you can use AirDNA, you can use B&B Calc. There's a lot of different ways to try and figure out what your income would be. So I can give you an example. We have a Victorian downtown Kalamazoo that is a duplex, and it's a large old building right in downtown. There's no houses around it. It's kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, but it's perfect for Airbnb. And we started that building by doing rental arbitrage, and we found a tired landlord. He, had it up on Facebook Marketplace, and I think he was asking 1350 a month for it. And now we bought that building because we did so well in it that we were able to. But we bring in anywhere from on the low side 4,500 up to sometimes 7,000 per unit. There are additional expenses though, like
Sure.
we pay the gas, we pay the cleaners, we pay all the maintenance, which we did anyways when we're arbitraging it. So I would say overall, maybe owning the asset, we financed it around, I think we were around 7% on that property. Um, so probably per year we make an extra 10 grand owning it.
Okay.
If I can refi that when rates drop back down, I'll be making, an extra probably
13.
20 or,
Yeah.
something like that, depending on what it is. So,
You made a really good point there that like what you have to understand if you're stepping into the arbitrage space is you are covering all the bills.
mhm,
Like you are putting all the power, the electric, the water, gas, all the services are in your name and you have to cover those.
right.
So it's not just rent versus rent potential or like your lease rent versus rent potential on Airbnb. You've got associated bills. And
You
so
do, and you've got recurring things that a lot of people don't think about too is, l
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, you have linens. Linens do not last forever. They get stained, they get ripped, they get ruined, they go missing in suitcases, towels go missing, people break glassware. There's a lot of ongoing expenses that a lot of
Okay.
people don't really consider that are actually, you know, fairly sizable. Even soap, toilet paper, paper towel, dish pods, all that you have to keep it stocked. So
Yeah. Well, there's people that take all that shit every time
they
because
do. They definitely do.
it makes me think
We
about Joey Tribbiani from Friends and they like shoving it all in the bag.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I was watching Home Alone last night, and the uncle that's really cheap that never will pay for anything,
Yeah.
they're on the flight to Paris, and they're sitting in first class, and the silverware is made out of silver. Or no, I think it was like a salt shaker was made out of crystal, and he's making his wife shove it in her purse. Like the weirdest stuff goes missing.
I'm
But
sure.
it makes it so you almost have to update your photos like every, 2 or 3 years, because that people will break some wall art, or the centerpiece gets broken, and then you look at the pictures, then you look at the unit, and you're like, well, it used to look like this, but now this is different, and this is
Sure.
different. So yeah.
Um, Tell me about your coaching. You had a term in your bio that was plex hacking.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard that before.
S-
Tell me about that because I
so
think. Go ahead.
there was Just recently, the federal government made it so that if you want to use traditional financing, that it used to be 25% for a fourplex, and they lowered that to 5% down, which
Yeah,
personally I believe is the biggest opportunity that I've seen in real estate, especially if you want to start um, building long-term wealth. And that is something that was very unapproachable to people because 25% of $1 million is 250 grand.
yeah,
If you're looking like, okay, I'm going to start in real estate, most people that say that don't have 250 grand sitting around, So
sure.
now, if you have 50 grand sitting around, you can go buy $1 million asset. There are, stipulations to it. You have to live in one of the units for a year, but you could you can now go get $1 million asset, $50,000 down, put 3 of the units on Airbnb and start cash flowing. And instead of paying, a couple grand, 3 or 4 grand, whatever, however big your house is for living, you can get paid to live there. After a year, you can move out. You can go and buy another single family, whatever you want to do.
Yep.
Or you can do it again, and then you can do it again. And you can, after, 4 years, you're sitting with 12 units and you're making way more money from that than what you are from a W-2. And it's it's amazing because not only can you get the first one, but the added savings of not having a housing payment that, is just for you. Plus, you're probably going to make money on top of that if you do it right, is going to pay for your next one. And then those two are going to pay for the one after that. And it's the snowball that is just an incredible opportunity for people.
Yeah, yeah. I talk a lot about if you're young and don't have a ton of obligations and have that sort of flexibility, that's by far the best way to break
Absolutely.
into things for sure. Um, because you can do that with anything 1 to 4 units.
1 to 4 units. And like 90% of the country, I believe the dollar limit is for the loan is 1295. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. And there's a couple high cost areas where it's a little bit higher.
Yeah.
But they actually announced that they're going to increase it as well. And we should see that increase in the next month or so. So the it's a huge opportunity for people looking that are willing to sacrifice a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone doesn't want to move into a multifamily. They think, I don't want to live in an apartment, or I don't want to have neighbors. I don't want to, live next to people that I'm landlording for. But if you just do it and you put up with it for a couple years, you are setting yourself up for a lifelong changing event. I mean,
Yeah.
can you imagine in 10 years if you had 12 units and you have one house? And yeah, a house is a good investment. It's going to appreciate. But if you have multiple houses that have multiple units in them that are paying you, you're going to be in a way better spot because you're getting the appreciation anyways, but you're getting it on 4 buildings instead of one.
Well, most of the time you can even doing a long-term model, a long-term rental model, you can essentially live for free and pay for your building.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
If you do
you
it
don't.
right and you're in the right market and you buy right, you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You don't even have to necessarily Airbnb them. You could long-term rent them, and then when you move, that unit that you're moving out of is just pure cash flow for you.
right.
And
Absolutely.
so it's all about the numbers working, but if you have the patience, I mean, just like everything else, like no one's got the patience to allow things to build like that, right?
Right. Yep.
Because the model that you just laid out is 16 doors in 4 years.
Yep.
And so like if you live in one and you rent 15, and theoretically your other 3 quads that you own are cash flowing $1,000 a month, probably at least, because you've got that unit you moved out of is now pure profit,
Right.
right? Long term or short term. I mean, you're talking whatever you have the capacity to do or the appetite to dive into. I mean, at the low end, you could be making 3 grand a month net and have a free place to live and have 15 additional rentals.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
that's like the worst case scenario.
I know. And I don't want it to sound, all rosy because there are some downsides to doing it. One
Sure.
is it's it's a hell of a lot easier to cash flow on a property if you're putting 25% down instead of
Yep.
5% down. So 5% down is a blessing, but it's also a curse. And the other thing that is associated with that is 3 years down the line, you're a little short on cash. You go to a bank. If you only put 5% down, you're not, I mean, appreciation could happen, things could blow up, you could have enough equity, but more than likely that's not something you're going to want to bet on that you're going to have enough equity to borrow against because you're only putting 5% down. And so even if you want to refinance at a lower rate because rates are high right now, it's not going to be a great option for you because, you put 5% down. So it's going to be hard to
Yeah.
get that back out.
That's really smart
Yeah.
to mention, though. I mean, you got to go in eyes wide open and understand that, because if you grab a loan today and you got 6.75% interest and it drops to 4.25 in a year, you're not probably going to be able to go refi that at 4.25. And
Exactly.
you just have to be aware of that.
Right. And I always want people before they jump into something to know, like, yeah, it's going to be great. You're going to do great at it, but you also need to be aware of the downfalls because
Mhm.
the last thing I want is someone to get into a position where they're doing something they can't afford to do or they're not knowledgeable about what they're doing and they all of a sudden hit a roadblock. So,
Yeah.
super important to mention that.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, I'm sure you get the same thing as far as people coming in with about $30,000 or something, and they're like, "What should I do?" And I'm like, "You need to pay for education and continue to
Yep.
save money." And like, that's
Right.
generally not enough money to really deal with. You can break in, but that's why arbitrage is great or
Yep.
wholesaling is great.
Yeah.
Like these cash flow options, for those guys like that don't maybe have enough money that it's safe to they don't have the capital reserves to dive into asset
Hmm.
holding, if you will. Um, but there's definitely options and ways to get involved. Like
Yep.
especially if you're flexible with your living situation, like you're
Right.
talking about. I mean, what you're mapping out is a path for like even a young couple, even if they had one kid, maybe I have 4 kids and a big ass dog. And like my life is way beyond like, we're going to uproot all this and live in a fourplex.
Yep.
I can't really pull that off right now and sell it
What
to everybody
my
on my team.
My wife and I currently we live in a 4,400 square foot 6-bedroom house, right? And we have 2 kids and we have a German Shepherd. And I think that we might do it
I
because
love it.
there's beautiful properties that are, you know, 3,000 square foot duplexes or, there you if you look at some of the new builds on the multifamily, there's some beautiful stuff out there and it's all super high end. And maybe, if you're doing something like that, you're not going to be cash flowing while you live in it, but instead of a $5,000 mortgage payment, you're going to be paying 800. And
Yeah.
then after a year, you move out and guess what? You're cash flowing and you have a beautiful asset that's going to appreciate and you can
That
do it
that
again.
That's another excellent point. It doesn't have to be a fourplex and it doesn't have to be like entry level multi-units either.
Right.
You don't have to do it like that, because
Yep.
we've got the same thing. I mean, we've got 1 to 4 units in Houston that are beautiful Victorians that, I mean, the rents is 4 grand to
Hmm.
live in a apartment and in some of these units. And but with the threshold at 129, like you can get into some really nice properties. And
Right. Oh,
so
yeah. Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a step backwards necessarily in your life. That's what you're expressing, which I
Yes.
think is a very
Absolutely.
good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
So
whenever people think of a multifamily, they think of a old cobbled up house that, the walls don't make sense and all that. But there are specifically built multifamily properties, especially in the southern regions. And kind of out in the Utah area too. There's a lot of really beautiful ones. They're very popular. And you could make a killing doing it, living in a beautiful home.
I
So
love it. I love it, man.
yeah.
That's great advice. Great advice. So Dan, what's next for you guys? What's on the horizon?
So we actually have bought into a laundromat franchise. So we've got that on the horizon. We've been looking into locations. We thought we had one, didn't work out. And the next piece of property that we want to buy is like a vacation rental, because everything we have right now, we run our Airbnbs as traveling, instead of vacation. So we want something that, even if it's like a cash flow break even, that we can use in one of the popular spots that we like going.
Okay.
Because we'll still capture appreciation,
Yep.
and instead of paying money to go travel there, at least we're breaking even, and
Sure.
I think that we will actually make some money on them the more that I look. And we also were talking about, maybe buying a duplex or a triplex and doing plex hacking, because honestly it makes sense and we are always up for an adventure. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so funny, man. Like, because we're selling all our shit right now and going RVing
uh,
with our whole crew.
And that's
So
exactly what we talked about, a 6 month across the country if we did that, because we'd have to downsize some, and we're like, well, as long as we're doing it, let's, look into getting are you thinking of doing a fifth wheel or like
yeah,
a class A?
no, we're doing a fifth wheel. I got to buy a
Nice.
dually and a new fifth wheel. We've
Yep.
RV'd for a long time. We've owned multiple RVs, but like we're gonna do it full time for a couple years because we homeschool
So do
and
we.
it just makes a lot of sense for us. So it's funny that I just was like, we couldn't move into a multi-unit, but we're gonna move into 400 square feet on
Right.
wheels.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great to have that flexibility and that freedom, though, and it also allows you a lot of leverage when you're wealth building too.
Yeah.
Because like what you're talking about and going to take out a multi-unit, you guys might only stay in there for 10, 11 months, 12 months, and then be on to the next thing that you're doing. But then you've captured this asset
Right.
that presumably should cash flow when you leave, obviously. And so you'll get the appreciation and the tax benefits and everything else from that.
Yep.
So
And
are you planning on staying in Kalamazoo area or are you planning
so
on
we do really want to. There's not a ton of new builds around here, or higher level, kind of luxury 2, 3, fourplex type things. So we're looking at other options too, like maybe building one.
Mhm.
I would have to look into the rules and regulations on exactly how to do that. Maybe I'd build it with a company and then buy it personally.
Sure.
There's, you know, a lot of different things we're considering. But yeah, if we moved, I think it'd be a hard sell because we have a great community here and our kids have friends and all that stuff that we
Yeah,
wouldn't want to leave, and we got families. So
I hear you. How'd you end up in the pulling the trigger on the laundromat franchise?
I wanted something, just diversification, I guess,
Mhm.
a cash flow heavy asset that was proven and that I had guidance. Because if there's anything that I've learned in business, it's that yes, you're capable of doing things yourself, but it's way easier to find someone who's figured it out and do what they tell you to do and put your own spin on it. So I learned that actually because I learned how to Airbnb arbitrage through a coaching program. And that's not something that I could not have figured out myself, but the progress that we made was so much faster that it paid for itself, 10 times over in the first year. And I think with anything that you're looking to do, that's super important. And it doesn't have to be a franchise, obviously. You could join a mastermind maybe on how to open a laundromat. But I
Yeah.
just know from experience that when we opened the restaurant, that it was just, grinding out 80 hours a week, constantly just working in the business, not on the business. And it took a long time to get to a point to where I felt like I had it figured out. But if I had a mentor or a coach, I feel like that would have been cut in a quarter.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge proponent of coaches and masterminds and all that
Hmm.
to compress time, limit your mistakes, and people look at the outlay of cash as the investment in those groups or coaches, and they don't understand the back end long tail savings of that when it
Absolutely.
comes to pain, suffering, emotional distress, and
Right.
money and money. Because I mean, like I did the same thing. We had a gym for 12 years, and it probably took me 5 years to figure that thing out.
Hmm.
And it was a struggle, and it was painful. And I mean, I went to the hospital, saw my first baby born, went back to the gym and coached 3 more classes that same day. I was
Story of my
gone.
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we had the restaurant.
Yeah.
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 Or I mean, when I was running the restaurant, I literally went back to work.
Yep. And so
Yeah,
you understand that there's like people that have figured this out that are ahead of you, and they will lay out the roadmap for you to not make the same mistakes and not have to take nearly as long. And it's so
100%.
beneficial. And so, well, man, good luck with the laundromat and everything that you have going on. And let us know if you hit the road in an RV for sure. We're going to be leaving in like sometime in the next 3 months. We're tying up all of our loose ends. I've got to do a rehab on a storage facility. We've got 128 unit self storage
Nice.
that we've got to finish lease up on, and then we'll be out of here. But where can
Awesome.
people find you?
They can go to dantemplin.com, or they can find the businessman Dan on Instagram.
The businessman Dan on Instagram. Guys, if you're looking into arbitraging or any other real estate plex hacking that he discussed and laid out in very easy to digest terms, if you're interested in any of that stuff, look up Dan for sure. And like we were talking about, get his guidance, eliminate the roadblocks, speed things up for yourself, and all right, man. Well, I appreciate you. Let me know if I can help you with anything in the future. And thank you for your time today, man. I really
Sounds
appreciate it.
good. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely.